And it's 5:04, so I'm going to get started. A very brief introduction and hello from me. For folks who have not met me yet before, my name is Muna Don Hijazi. I am the state coordinator for United Campus Workers of Arizona. I joined your fantastic union on January 13th of 2025. Just in time for the launch of the fantastic federal tax you've been under since January 21st. I come to you as a 20-year community and union organizer. Many of those years spent organizing nurses, healthcare workers, and adjuncts and graduate faculty, graduate assistants before joining you all in January. United Campus Workers, if you don't know too much about your union, not only do we represent faculty at University of Arizona, we represent faculty at all three of our public institutions, ASU and AAU as well. And we also represent all of your staff and all of your student workers and students. If you are on campus, you can join UCWAZ, and we are always fighting to represent you. Regardless of your membership status, we take our responsibilities as partners and representatives very seriously. So we look forward to working with all of you more in the future. That is more than enough from me. If you'd like to learn more about United Campus Workers, you can find us at ucwarizona.org. I'm sure someone can drop the link in our chat tonight. And some things I'll highlight for you to look at on that website is our 2024 year in review. Great capture of things we did leading up to 2025. Some fantastic statements you'll find under the About Us section under our statements coming from our EC representing our membership statewide. And our first annual lobby day was the beginning of March this year, aka our HELA, or Higher Education Labor Legislative Advocacy Day, intentionally similar to HALU, our Higher Education Labor United, through which we are so pleased to be partners with Todd and AAUP and many esteemed colleagues throughout the nation. Without further ado, though, please, I'd love to pass it to Layla with our co-sponsors tonight, the Faculty Senate at University of Arizona.
Great. Thank you so much, Muna. And thank you all for being here. I want to welcome you to this event, which I hope will be the first of many more in which faculty governance, with its statutory as well as traditional responsibilities here in Arizona, joins United Campus Workers Arizona, our wall-to-wall union, and the American Association of University Professors, in which many of us are members, to share information and strategies for defending universities, academic and constitutional freedoms, and the rights and working conditions of our community members in these unprecedented times in which we find ourselves. Here at the University of Arizona, we recently sponsored a faculty referendum in which 91% of nearly 1,000 faculty respondents approved a call to encourage our administration to defend our university and higher education generally in the face of unlawful government and ideological encroachment, to put real resources into that effort, and to join together with other institutions in the kind of broad alliances, which we now call mutual academic defense compacts, that our guest tonight, Todd Wolfson, has been critical in pioneering. In fact, in coordination with colleagues across the country, we at the University of Arizona have become members in the shared governance part of a mutual academic defense compact for public land grant universities that includes Rutgers, the UMass system, and at least 25 more across the country. From the defunding of grants and contracts, the disabling of federal agencies and departments, including education, to the revocation of international student visas, the weaponization and extortion of universities intended to stifle student, faculty, and staff constitutional and civil rights, especially around inclusive policy and practices, and protesting against the Israeli extirpation of Gaza, right down to today's newest outrage, namely the attempt to prevent Harvard from admitting or even teaching out its international students. It is indeed the time for university stakeholders of all descriptions and perspectives to organize to preserve higher education. It's a great pleasure to welcome Todd here tonight to present an overview of the challenges and emerging responses to the moment in which we find ourselves. There is no one better to provide us with this overview. I first met Todd in 2022 when we were both interviewed for an article in The Forge about new campus mobilizations, and it's interesting to look back on the last 3 years. Todd Wolfson was elected president of the AAUP in 2024 in a landslide after leading a strike in 2023 that won impressive contract and other victories for the 6,000 members of the Rutgers AAUP AFT coalition. He has also led the development of HALU, the Higher Education Labor United nonprofit that you've heard mention of already, a national effort to unite all higher education workers, whether faculty or not. And prior to his work as an academic union leader, Todd worked as a community and labor organizer in Philadelphia. He is also an anthropologist and an associate professor of media studies at Rutgers. He has published numerous books and articles focused on social movements, technology, and labor. He is the author of Digital Rebellion, Birth of the Cyber Left, The Great Refusal, Herbert Marcuse and Contemporary Social Movements, and most recently in 2021, The Gig Economy, Workers and Media in the Age of Convergence. Todd has re-energized the AAUP. He does not shy away from politics or activism. He uses his speech and his platforms boldly, proudly, without fear, and yet was described in inside higher ed as a mensch who does not try to impose his vision on the organizations that he leads, rather devotes himself to creating inclusive spaces to fight for universities and their working people. It's my pleasure to introduce Todd Wolfson.
Thank you so much, Layla. That was a nice quote from Joe Berry. Thank you all. I want to thank both UCW Arizona and the Faculty Senate at University of Arizona for inviting me to speak. And I've said this many times over the year that I love the UCW wall-to-wall model. I think it's a critical part of the vision we need for higher ed. So I'm really honored to get to be here. I also have to put out a caveat. It's like 8:15. It's like approaching kid bedtime. Kids are going to be coming in here. Potentially, I shut the door. My apologies. I'm trying to keep them out. And I want to thank Layla, but also Muna and Katie and others for organizing this. I'll try to speak for like 20 minutes, and then hopefully I'm much more interested in the back and forth. But I'll start by saying the obvious. Our colleges and universities are under attack, and at this point, it's not even a controversial statement. We could define it as authoritarian wing, we could define it as a fascist wing, but a growing wing of the U.S. government's targeted higher ed for radical takeover. To bring this to life and to show the real goals, I want to start actually before Trump got into office in Florida. And take, for instance, the New College of Florida and just walk through what their goals were. So NCF, New College of Florida, is Florida's state honors college and one of the premier public liberal arts colleges in the country, consistently ranked in the top 5 public liberal arts colleges. And in that college, on quaint Sarasota Bay, what Ron DeSantis saw was an opportunity to create a conservative beacon in the South, in Florida. He also wanted to use it to fuel his presidential ambitions. And so he took it over, and the annexation was swift. It began in early 2023. He appointed conservative allies to the majority of the Board of Governors. Within a few months, they fired the first female president of the university, Patricia Oker. She was only 2 years into her term. They appointed Richard Corcoran, an ally. And this was just the beginning. By the summer of 23, the board dismantled their DEI programs, sound familiar? Fired multiple administrators, denied tenure to 5 faculty that came up, which was a majority of the faculty that came up. And by the fall of 2023, 40% of the faculty were gone and 10% of the student body was gone. And then last fall, one of the awful things was they they found in the trash a bunch of library books focused on from the library at NCF that were on gender studies. They had just thrown them in the trash in the compost. Chris Rufo, the conservative provocateur known for engineering the attack on critical race theory, and the most high-profile DeSantis appointee to NCF openly detailed their plan. And he said, quote, "We are now over the walls and ready to transform higher education from within. Under the leadership of Governor DeSantis, our all-star board will demonstrate that public universities, which have been corrupted by woke nihilism, can be recaptured, restructured, reformed." And that the seizure of NCF was just the tip of the sword. In DeSantis' attack on public higher ed, he signed a series of state bills into law that took aim at the other publics. The sweeping bills, which the American Council on Learned Societies called a frontal attack on academic freedom, defund diversity, equity, inclusion for all Florida's public higher ed. They eliminate majors in key subjects, including race and gender studies. They create post-tenure review processes. They wrest academic hiring from the hands of faculty and put it in the hands of political appointees. And of course, they created new curricular requirements around Western Civ. And so actually AAUP went down and they did a report on it, and they wrote, quote, "Academic freedom, tenure, and shared governance in Florida's public colleges and universities currently face a political and ideological driven assault unparalleled in U.S. history. Is sustained. This attack threatens the very survival of meaningful higher education." Sadly for us, the attacks we saw in Florida were a lab. They were a laboratory for what they are now trying to do in the U.S. overall, as we've watched all of us over the last 4 months. So, I mean, I think we all know it, but I think, given how much time we have, I really just want to outline really briefly what the attacks look like that we've seen since Trump took office. So first and foremost, we've seen a massive destruction to our biomedical research infrastructure. Billions of dollars of funding ripped out of the most advanced biomedical research infrastructure in the world. The budget for next year has the NIH defunded by about 50%, I think 44%. So far, the NIH this year has given out about $3 billion. Last year at this time, they had given out something like $8 billion. If you project out, we're seeing the NIH funding cut in half. It's not just the NIH. It's just the most visible. The NSF has seen similar cuts, National Endowment on Humanities, NASA, DOE, across the board. And so I think it's important to note that this is going to have dire impacts on the health of every American. But obviously they haven't stopped there. We are seeing abductions of our students in broad daylight. Some of those students have thankfully been released, but not all of them. Hundreds, if not thousands, of visas have been revoked in higher ed from students and faculty. There have been lawsuits, and some of those lawsuits have won. Certainly at Rutgers, we were able to get a stay on those, the revoking of the visas. One of the things that we've seen is this real radical attempt to actually control our institutions. The Ivies have been the ones that we've seen the most attempts at full incursion. But the letters to Harvard and Columbia, for instance, demand actual control over the process of admitting students, control over who is in the Middle East Studies program and what they teach, control over how students are disciplined. So real radical interventions into the control and the running of our institutions. With respect to DEI, we're seeing both the programs and the research. We're seeing, massive defunding of research, but also like an ideological attempt to erase the painful history of racism and slavery in this country, as if, Um, Obviously, we've seen massive defunding of our historically black colleges and universities, but also our tribal colleges and universities. Privatization of our student loans is on the table. And of course, and I want to like just leave it here for a second, the weaponization of anti-Semitism to crush protest, particularly protest around the genocide in Gaza. But I think we need to also recognize that the goal isn't just around Gaza and the protests there. The goal is to crush dissent. And if you can crush it in higher ed, you can crush it more broadly. And so, I mean, I think we all have seen it, but I think it's important to recount what we're seeing. The attacks on higher ed and the desire for the government to have a direct say or control over what faculty teach and research and what college students learn and say is an authoritarian fever dream. And so I think it's important to note how we got here. How did what was once one of the most respected sectors in U.S. society become a convenient foil? And more importantly, where do we go from here? So I'll try to nail those two things in the rest of the time. And then I'm really looking forward to getting into a back and forth. But I really think we can't, if we understand the attacks on higher ed as starting with DeSantis or Trump, we've missed the picture. So there's a history that brought us into this moment. And in this case, there's an unimpeachable record of federal and state divestment from public higher education over the last 50 years. And it's importantly divestment from public higher education that began to develop at the same time that Black students and people of color more broadly were finally getting access to free or highly subsidized higher education at institutions like the University of California or the City University of New York. Moreover, the defunding of higher ed that began 50 years ago began on the heels of the 60s because college campuses were the backbone of social movements like the Berkeley Free Speech Movement, the Civil Rights Movement, the anti-war movement, even the Black Panther Party. And California was ground zero for this fight, recognizing the role college campuses played in the emergence of many of the social movements of the 60s. Governor Ronald Reagan tied state divestment from the University of California directly to the radicals in Berkeley. During his 1970 reelection campaign for governor, Reagan's education advisor, Roger Freeman, declared, quote, "We are in the danger of producing an educated proletariat. That's dynamite. We have to be selective on who goes to college." And with this in mind, during his tenure as governor, Reagan cut back state support for University of California by 20%, and he introduced new fees. At that time, it was free. It was free at that time. And that was the beginning of massive state and federal divestment from higher ed. That was the moment. But Reagan's not the only conservative leader that targeted campuses. In 1971, Lewis Powell was commissioned to write a report for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which became known as the Powell Memo. And in this report, Powell argued that the free market system was under attack and the campus was the main source of anti-American sentiment. And then he put forward a whole vision of how to fight back. So operating in parallel to the right-wing attack and subsequent federal and state divestment from higher ed is the broad ascendance of corporate or neoliberal logics, which became like dominant in the U.S. And to me, it's this twin dynamics of this racialized and politicized divestment, as well as the dominance of neoliberal logics and like privatization of our public universities that sort of emerged and led our universities to become so corporatized. So divestment led to like a more corporate university. And to me, the reason why I'm saying this is if we don't know what we're up against, we're not going to know how to fight it. So if we think the fight is merely about Trump or fascism and we miss its ideological ties to neoliberalism, we're not going to figure out the right fight. So it's not simply corporatization of the university, but the entwined relationship between fascism and anti-democratic forces of neoliberalism, which give us the university as it is today. And I'll leave that there, but just say that we know the outcomes. University of Arizona, Arizona State, Northern Arizona, all lived the outcomes of this divestment. Massive debt, skyrocketing tuition, dependence on contingent labor, growing class of bureaucrats that run our institutions but can't run them in a way that's connected to the core mission of our institutions. I think back on the Education Workforce Committee hearings last year, where they brought presidents down to DC, and none of those presidents could successfully respond to the charges or fight and offer an adequate vision for what the university was. And it's because of the hollowing out of our university. And so I really think it's important to know that like the hollowing out and the divestment of our university has enabled this fascist attack on our university that we're seeing right now. All right, so moving forward, I think from my vantage, while like this 50-year fight has made us very vulnerable, there's also some really good news. Higher education is better organized than it's ever been in the history of this country. Over the last few years, we talked about this a little bit, we've seen a militant strike wave across higher education like we have never seen before. From the University of California, the University of Michigan, University of Illinois, Chicago, Temple grads, I'm missing so many, but also the Rutgers strike. And that's where I cut my teeth. And what I saw during the Rutgers strike and what I really want to lean into was the power of workers when we're organizing across job category. So what happened there was we worked together as like 8 unions representing about 20,000 workers, and we put forward a response to the pandemic when the pandemic was coming that asked faculty to sacrifice on behalf of staff. And prior to that, the unions did not work together, and there was not a very strong alliance between them. But this built some trust. And from there, that happened in, I think, the spring of 22. From there, spring of 21. From there, we won that. We basically faculty furloughed, but they were kept whole through unemployment. And the money that was saved, we made demands for no layoffs and demands for adjuncts that were laid off to get their jobs back. And what that led us to was a recognition that we needed to build together towards our next contract campaign. So in 2023, 3 unions representing 10,000, all academic workers, well, not professional staff, which are also academic workers, but all teachers and researchers struck together, 10,000 folks. And we centered the demands of the most vulnerable, grad workers, adjuncts, postdocs, and we won massive raises, 40% for our adjuncts, 33% for our grad workers, some percentage around there for our postdocs. And we also won a lot more. We won more security at work. So our adjuncts, after a certain number of semesters, get 1 and then 2-year contracts, and our full-time non-tenure faculty have presumptive renewal, which is close to tenure. And so, what that taught me is that the way we're going to build our power is aligning across job categories. And so I think that's what I want to lean into as we talk through, like, how do we respond to this moment? I think first and foremost, well, let me say one more thing. While we've also seen amazing strikes in higher ed, we've also seen our students step up. I don't want to miss that, right? The encampments last year, but now all the way through this year under really hard circumstances, we've seen our students stepping up. We saw students at NYU and George Washington both use their commencement speeches to speak their mind, and both of them haven't gotten their diplomas. But I also want to note that it's not just faculty and staff that have been stepping up in this fight. It's also our students, and which is one of the reasons we're in a strong position. So, I have just a little time left, and so I just want to outline how I'm thinking about how we resist, and then I'm hoping we get into a back and forth. I think first and foremost, we have to organize at the campus level. Like, there is no resistance to Trump without power at the campus level. And, that means learning the skills of organizing. That means doing political education together. And it means building power and running campaigns. But also, and to lean back into UCW's model, it can't be tenured faculty organizing tenured faculty, grads organizing grads, professional staff organizing professional staff. ground staff organizing ground staff. It has to be all of us together. And so I think we really need to figure out how to build wall to wall on our campuses. The boss, they want us divided. And so we need to unite. That's the only way to fight back against them. I will note it's hard. It's hard because the hierarchical structure that we inherit from the university bleeds into our union spaces. And it's very difficult to hermetically seal those things off. And so we really have to be thoughtful about how to do this work, but there's no other work to do. But I don't want to pretend like it's just easy. It's just like you wave a wand and all of a sudden you're a wall-to-wall formation. No, we really have to be intentional about differences, power differences across job categories in the university. We also need to unite with our students and build with our communities. I think these things are the core elements of being able to fight back. But scaling up from the campus level, and this gets to HELU, we have to build a national movement for higher ed. So one thing that I recognized when I was president of Rutgers Union, and then which led us to build Higher Ed Labor United, is that there's just not much leadership in nationally, certainly from labor, around the future of higher ed. And I think that's because every single one of our unions has another sector of workers that's more important, that's bigger. We could talk about UAW and auto or AFT and K-12, but down the line, and what's that's led to is a vacuum of leadership. And so we built Higher Ed Labor United, which has got probably about 100 local unions in it in order to respond to that problem. As a way of building a united higher ed movement of workers to put out a vision for the future of the sector. And so we've been doing that. And so today we actually had a launch event for a policy platform. I was down in DC with leaders from Higher Ed Labor United, which included leaders from CWA, from United Auto Workers, from AFT, from AAUP, from United Electrical Workers, all coming together and putting out a vision for the future of the sector. And I guess the last thing I'll say, and then we should get into a back and forth, is I want to underline that from my vantage, for the last 4 months, faculty and staff have led this fight, and we need to continue to lead this fight. Our elected officials are not going to lead the fight over the future of higher education, and our presidents and our administrators certainly ain't going to lead the fight over the future of the sector. Instead, they're going to hide and hope that no one picks on their school. And so there's only one way forward, and that is for us to lead the fight. And we can talk about the mutual academic defense compacts. That's one part of the fight. And what that is demanding that fighting and turning the guns on our administrators and demanding they stand up to the Trump administration and they work together to defend higher ed. And the last thing I'll say is that that's not the only place we need to fight, right? We need to use the courts. The courts are not the answer in this fight against the attacks on higher ed, but they do slow down certain things. We need to get into the street. We need to organize. We had 3 national days of action in the fall. But we're going to need to get more militant as they attack us and increasingly attack us. And I think we also need to have a counter narrative. Right now, the only people talking about higher education in the national level are Ron DeSantis or Chris Rufo or Donald Trump or J.D. Vance. And we must offer a counter imaginary. We must help people imagine or reimagine why colleges and universities are so important to this country, important to the economy, innovation, social mobility, and democracy. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to align with other sectors of workers under threat. We are not going to be able to win the fights in front of us alone. So we're going to need to align, and we have been aligning with federal workers who are getting laid off. We're going to need to align with K-12 workers, healthcare workers, immigrant workers, all attacked in different ways. And labor is going to need to lead the fight back here. And the only way we're going to do it is if we organize across sector and across union.